When the results of the COVID-19 clinical vaccine trials were released to the public, it revealed a familiar pattern. Women and minorities participated in the trials far less than Caucasian men. To learn more, Lenz spoke with a leading authority on ways to lessen gender disparity in the pursuit of new treatments and therapies.
Participation in clinical trials right now, roughly 70% men, 30% women. Why is that?
That's a big difference between male and female as we battle for equity. In this gender inequities is the childbearing age and pregnancy concerns, which could put women at higher risk of unknown risk on the impact on the newborn babies yet to be born. Women are also have additional responsibilities than men in at domestic front, and which may make it harder for women to participate if they have to travel to a physical brick and mortar site in a different location.
Are there ways around that now? How do we make this clinical trial participation more diverse?
Federally funded clinical trials are now mandated to aim for gender equity and diversity, but it may not be true for industry-sponsored clinical trials yet. And industry is way too concerned about the safety of women and children. And that's one major barrier to overcome.
Harsha, what are decentralized clinical trials, or DCTs?
Decentralized clinical trials are basically a new way of saying home-based or remote clinical trials, the process by which new drugs are tested for safety and efficacy by pharmaceutical companies have been restricted to brick and mortar sites, say at MD Anderson or Dana-Farber for cancer or other diseases, academic medical centers, which are predominantly concentrated in California, Texas, Florida, and Boston. That leaves out 95% of the Americans from accessing these drug trials. And there are many companies that are developing software technologies to essentially enable telemedicine visits and remote engagement of patients. They can participate from wherever they are. And that empowers the remaining neglected 95% of Americans to have a shot at learning about these clinical trials, being invited to these trials.
Doctor, would a more diverse participation necessarily lead to more effective treatments and drugs?
Great question, Rich. 100%, right? So everybody agrees it's better science, and make sure that we have learned from lessons from the past, which is, cardiovascular drugs, cholesterol drugs, blood pressure drugs, all were conducted on more men than women, and hence are less effective on women at large, even though they are highly affected by these indications. A particular case is psychiatric diseases, which are disproportionately affecting women than men, but are less likely to be involved in clinical trials and drug development. So certainly making sure the drugs are tested on the target population with full diversity and inclusion is something the FDA commissioner has taken upon as a priority number one.
Doctor, the COVID vaccine clinical trials, did that follow this pattern where there were many more men involved in those trials than women?
Pfizer was the first company to go out and put a comprehensive report of all their past clinical trials and reporting the demographics. About 80% roughly are Caucasian male adults from affluent socioeconomic backgrounds, or who have been participating in these trials over the last several decades. And that hasn't changed much until now. And hence, it put a huge spotlight on the urgent need to drive diversity, equity, inclusion, and access to these treatments. And that includes gender, race, ethnicity, and also socioeconomic parameters. People from low and middle income ranges are less likely to participate in a clinical trial than high income and affluent backgrounds. And LGBTQ community is also heavily underrepresented. And of course, race is a huge issue. African American, Asian, and Hispanic communities are severely underrepresented still.
Doctor, thank you so much. Fascinating information. Thanks for giving us the time.
Thank you so much for having me, Rich. This is really a center stage right now topic in the pharmaceutical industry, and it's great to be here.